Good evening. Who is Javad Zarif? Mohammed Javad Zarif. Who is he? To search, you will find that he was the chief negotiator at Geneva, the recently concluded conversation agreement. Every word here needs to be translated back and forth, Farsi to English, to Spanish, to French, to Latin, to German, to Russian, to Chinese, and then back to English. Agreement in Geneva. Mohammed Javad Zarif. Zarif, a white goatee, a very smooth manner, fluent in English and in many other languages. On Farsi television, within these last hours, I've been reviewing a video that's available. You can all search it on YouTube. Reviewing a video that's available, Mr. Zarif being interviewed in Tehran upon his return about the next steps and the negotiation. And we expect to begin again December 20th, and we'll go immediately to the final end negotiation. And the next 6 months will be difficult. All diplomatic words. Behind this, however, is a man with a reputation and a record in the United States, in New York. This is not an unknown representative of the Supreme Leader. This is a very well-known criminal. Claudia Rosett, writing most recently in the Weekly Standard, takes us to a building in Manhattan. It's raining right now, so it's a wet building, but it's a very, very expensive building. 650 Fifth Avenue. Good real estate. Nice location. That building was associated with something called the Alavi Foundation, that the U.S. Attorney to the Southern District of New York once named the Alavi Foundation, and that building, 36 stories, the largest ever terrorism-related forfeiture ever in the United States of America. Claudia, very good evening to you. What relation to the smooth and extremely sophisticated Mohammed Javad Zarif and 650 Fifth Avenue? Good evening, Claudia.
Good evening, John. That building was taken over from the government of the Shah by the Islamic regime of Iran with the Islamic 1979 revolution, and run through a series of shell companies' front operations as an enormous multi-million-dollar money laundering operation by the government of Iran. That was the opinion, that was the finding in a federal court this September in New York. And the way that this worked is that building is a very fancy office tower, 36 stories. They rent out the offices, millions in income every year. This income was distributed by a foundation in New York, the Alavi Foundation, which we learn from court documents was in fact directed after about 1991 by the Iranian ambassadors to the UN in series. One ambassador after another would take charge of this foundation. Its board of directors was effectively a formality at the direct orders, and all this comes from the court documents, at the direct orders of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. The Iranian ambassador to the United Nations would oversee this enormous money laundering operation for the Iranian government, gross abuse of diplomatic privilege, violation of U.S. law. And in the chain of ambassadors who oversaw this operation, one of them was none other than the twittering, Facebooking, deal-striking
Mohammed Javad Zarif.
Precisely.
Mr. Zarif, has he been required to answer for this investigation?
No. He had diplomatic immunity, so he has not been prosecuted, and this case finally really came to light in court after he left. But he figures in the forfeiture complaint. He's described as one of the ambassadors who ran this operation. In fact, not only did he run it, the description in the civil forfeiture complaint filed by federal prosecutors was that while he was overseeing this operation, the Alavi Foundation was threatened with a lawsuit by one of its former presidents, who threatened to reveal in open court who really owned the building, the foundation, who was really behind the operation, namely the Iranian government, and more specifically the terror-related Bank Melli, which is a state-owned Iranian bank.
All right, we've identified Zarif and the money laundering operation, criminal behavior, terrorism. I now want to connect it to John Kerry. We see in the photographs from Geneva, both times, John Kerry, as Secretary of State, is sitting across the table from Mohammad Javad Zarif. You note that Robert Morgenthau, the former Manhattan District Attorney, testified before John Kerry and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I'm presuming, in 2009. Did they discuss this building and this laundering?
Yes, they did. Mr. Morgenthau said quite specifically, and I'm quoting, "We were looking at the Alavi Foundation." He's talking about the Manhattan DA's office, this major Iranian foundation in New York, and we found money going overseas to suspect people. The bank accounts connected with that led them on to colossal bank stripping operations, major banks laundering Iranian details out of illegal transactions. So this was part of a much larger network.
In other words, Mr. Kerry is fully informed as early as 2009 that Zarif is part of a criminal organization.
He should have been. All you need to do is connect about 2 dots, because at the point where Mr. Morgenthau began looking at the Alavi Foundation, Javad Zarif was the ambassador of Iran in New York. He was the guy who was overseeing this. Now, at that point, it wasn't clear that the ambassador was overseeing it. But if you start looking, if you actually look into some of the details, you see a fair amount of back and forth between the mission, the foundation. In fact, there have been discussion of earlier secret reports that our government looked into this back in the 90s and found connections. Over and over, the American government chose to ignore it, a series of administrations, possibly, John, because they didn't want to upset Iran, which is much the reason, I think, in the press release from the Southern District on the Alavi case, that was calling it the largest ever terrorism-related forfeiture, the name of Javad Zarif is not mentioned. He's referred to, but he's simply referred to as somebody's successor. Is not actually named. Now that press release and the judge's opinion saying, yes, this was an Iranian front operation, came out just about a week and a half before Javad Zarif and Iran's new president Rouhani came to New York for the UN General Assembly opening. One might wonder if U.S. authorities were trying to be terribly tactful and not embarrass the Iranian foreign minister by pointing out that he had overseen, gross sanctions violations and money laundering right in the middle of New York while he was ambassador charming all the senators.
Worth pressing here is we're not talking about a money laundering operation that was lining the pockets of the plutocrats. We're talking about the money laundering operation. This is Bank Melli, related to the Asa Corporation, related to the Alavi Foundation, all supervised by the ambassadors, that, according to the U.S. Attorney and the Treasury Department, was providing banking services to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps and the Quds Force, as well as pouring money into, quote, its role in Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. So the very thing that they're negotiating in Geneva that Iran says it is not doing, building a nuclear weapon with a ballistic missile to deliver that weapon, money was flowing under Zarif's control to Bank Melli, to Iran. We wanted to establish that because, yes, you don't make peace treaties with your friends. You make them with your enemies. However, the American people, Claudia, in these early days, we have a lot of time left here, need to have access to information that we're not dealing with enemies. We're dealing with criminals. And that's a different consideration in people's minds about what is fair and what is not. Criminals are not, to my experience, invested in fair play, or invested in compromise, or looking to keep to the terms of their agreements. If you make a deal with a criminal, you are liable to everything that happens to you, and you're part of the problem. Do you agree with this line of reasoning, Claudia?
Oh, yeah. What we see here is the real Javad Zarif.
Right.
While he was being the charming ambassador, he was smoothly running this very dirty operation, which was, as you say, sending money back to an outfit that runs with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the nuclear and missile proliferation programs of Iran.
The very thing he's denying exists in Geneva.
Correct.
So he's a practiced deceiver as well as a criminal. Now, there is not time now to review all of Zarif's conduct, but he is the best of the best right now, the front line of the Iranian regime, the supreme leader. And Claudia, from this interview, I can only read it in the subtitles, but from this interview, boy, he is like a winning coach after winning the Super Bowl, Claudia.
Oh, well, he is doing that. That's what he's doing for the Islamic Republic of Iran's Grand Ayatollah. He is bringing the nuclear dream home. This guy's going to be quite a hero. And all the business of he's fighting against the hardliners back home, no. This is a man who marches to the orders and has for 30 years at least of the supreme leader of Iran. It's that simple. And he is one of their smoothest, most adept diplomats. The fact that he speaks fluent English and has good manners in public does not for 1 second mean that he is not engaged in duplicity on a scale that could cost the lives of millions.
Criminal conduct. U.S. Attorney, New York City, Mohammad Javad Zarif. Claudia Rosett, writing most of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, writing in the Weekly Standard. Know your enemy. I'm John Batchelor.